Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Breachside Broadcast, home of the finest voxcasting either side of the breach. The arrival and sudden departure of the Burning Man has left a power vacuum in Malifaux that even the Guild has struggled to fill. Governor General Marlowe has sought to bolster the Guild's power by enlisting some unorthodox military units from Earthside and using strategies that have a higher tolerance for collateral damage than is typically condoned. I hope you enjoy meeting Harold Tull and his company in Part 2 of Madness of Malifaux.
This episode of the Breachside Broadcast is brought to you by the Guild's Office of Amalgamation. Residents of Malifaux are required to report any unauthorized human-mechanical hybrids to the Amalgamation Office immediately. A Guild engineer, under the supervision of Charles Hoffman, will investigate the aberration and, if deemed to contravene Guild protocols, decommission it. Note that the Guild takes no responsibility for loss of life resulting from the decommissioning process.
The Burning Man's absence allowed Titania to relax the wards that protected the Knotwoods. The power of the Autumn Court slowly seeped back into the earth. Fey magic replaced by the warp and weft of Malifaux's native ether. Her sight faded. This was just another season, another sowing, another opportunity. The field must lie fallow, but then there would be the harvest. A glorious, bloody harvest. It took Nekima and her band 3 days to get to the oldest part of the Knotwoods, far from the comfort of the blood pits. A barren expanse of black earth and broken rock stretched through the forest, as though the great trees had been scraped away from the ground. The trees that lined this bleak place were twisted and malformed, their branches forced into painful shapes. Fog clung to everything, catching on chunks of stone jutting from the ground. So much about this place had changed since the days of ancient glory. Nekima ruled a world left to starve and die. The far peaks loomed out of the fog, painted in grim colors against the grey horizon. The frozen ground crunched beneath her hooves. Cliff faces of dark stone rose out of the forest, pocked with tiny caves, like droplets of black blood suspended in mist. The weight of ages suppressed every sound. Each step made the silence louder. She looked up at the mountain's face. The black Eyrie waited. Nekima looked at the blade in her hand. It was the same weapon her mother held so long ago. She had declared herself queen, but none had come to honor her. None acknowledged her claim. And now the Burning Man was threatening all the work that she had done. She could not allow that to happen. She would not, at any cost. Nekima raised her hand. Her small brood stumbled to a halt, clinging to the dying tree line. They were a pathetic lot, but all that Nekima would spare for such a dangerous task. One of the Blackblood shamans, his wings tattered and drooping to the shattered stone, looked up at her desperately. Nekima sneered. "The rest shall remain here. You are to come with me." The Nephilim retreated to the tree line to cower with their brethren, while the shaman bowed his head. Perhaps he knew the fate that waited for him in the fog. No matter. Nekima bent her attention to the waiting Eyrie. Already the Eyrie's ancient presence was overwhelming. Nekima continued forward, fighting against the pressure inside her skull. It pushed back, an eldritch force whispering incomprehensible demands that tore through her mind like a rot. This place was just as she remembered from her last visit so long ago. A vastness of black, dead ground chewed through the forest and up the mountain. Chipped laystone surrounded the clearing, the script on their surfaces nearly worn away. The distant cliffs faded in and out of sight, cloaked in the veils of fog. There was no sign of the Eta Cathay, the Ancient of Days, the highest arbiters of the Nephilim. But Nekima was their queen. She hooked a claw, and the shaman trailing in her wake shuffled meekly toward her. She gathered herself against the battering presence of the Eyrie, then motioned toward the clearing. Call them. The shaman clutched his mask, eyes going distant. Every inch of his body trembled. Tears dropped to the ground, making tiny sounds as the Nephilim silently wept. A last look of desperation at Nekima's face bore no fruit of mercy. The shaman forced his limbs to move and stepped into the clearing. The air changed. Long faded runes sparked to life within the enormous stones littering the ground. Voices grafted themselves to the shaman's black blood, cutting deep into Nekima's core. Their words slipped between old Neverborn and shamanic verse, only half revealing the intended words, if they were even words at all. The Nephilim queen watched, unmoving. Fog curled and peeled away from the ground, like some great cicada shedding its shell. Shade skittered in the distance, dancing between spots of the knotwood's fading light. The shaman's incantation wove through the fog, his words twisting to match the rising light. Every so often, he slammed the end of his staff on the ground. It echoed quietly, amplified by the black Eyrie, yet stifled by whatever magic cursed the place, like thunder fading in a storm. The sound of breaking bones broke through the muffled silence. The shaman stopped chanting with a strained gurgle. He clutched his chest, managing one step backwards before collapsing. Meat squelched. A few spurts of black blood popped from skin pierced with shards of bone. Then, as if dragged by an invisible force, the body disappeared deeper into the fog. Nekima stood up straighter, her senses focused on the silence. We would accept your offering. Before her stood 13 figures, half cloaked in fog. Their silhouettes were primal and monstrous. Fur, bones, and claws wrapped bodies marked with ancient tattoos. Metal torques lay around each neck. Masks crafted from skulls and stained with blood rendered each shaman faceless. The figures waited while Nekima placed a hand over her heart. My Eta Cathay, she said reverentially. Are you here for the Queen trial? One of the shamans asked. His mask looked like a one-eyed stag, with charms dangling from its antlers. You carry your mother's blade. I have another purpose, Nekima said. Oh. Titania is regaining her power. She has already sworn many of our kind to her letting stone, binding them to the Autumn Court with blood. A figure the humans unleashed, which they call the Burning Man, has torn through the ether and afflicts our home with his insanity. We must reclaim what is ours. Why should we trust you? The speaker was a shaman with a many-eyed mask like a spider, serrated jaws hanging loosely at his sides. Crossed by stars, sister killer, black blood taker. He became more animated as he spoke, gesticulating with his script-carved staff. Nekima twitched at each of the titles thrown at her. I am the Queen of the Nephilim. I do what must be done. None of the shamans moved. An unexpected nervousness seized Nekima's heart. The claim was bold. and unsubstantiated. If they denied her this, she would lose the claim entirely. Nekima shifted on her hooves, knuckles wrapped tightly around the living blade. The only sound as she waited was the clink of bones and the creak of old joints. Finally, a reedy voice came from a shaman wearing a bird-like mask, adorned with feathers and a shattered beak. "What does she ask?" Relief joined the coolness on her skin. Nekima took a breath and spoke carefully. "The Atagathe must share all the knowledge they have on the dread art. Bringing back our dead may be the only way to ensure we have the strength and numbers to destroy Titania and her autumn court. We must do nothing." The new voice rippled through the air, soft but ancient. A 14th shape materialized in the thick mist. It grew more defined as it approached. Long robes hung from a gaunt form, cloaked by enormous leathery wings. The creature's face was obscured by a mask that carried a crown of horns, distorting his figure. His staff reminded Nekima of her own blade, wicked and crooked and sharp. Nekima resisted the sudden urge to fall to one knee. "My Sycorax," she said, again placing her fist over her heart. The shaman bowed his head. "You still honor our ways, Nekima," the Sycorax said, "but you overstep." Nekima wanted to carve the shaman apart for his insolence, but knew she wouldn't take more than a few steps before being killed. She fought against the effect the Aerie was having on her subconscious. The Atagathe could work their tricks, but the Nephilim Queen was stronger. Titania's court grows stronger each day, and the humans' machinations set Malifaux's skies ablaze. Without the Atagathe's knowledge, I don't know how much longer our kind will endure. We must act now. Nekima watched a few of the shamans shift uncomfortably. Good. It was the truth, and one that all Nephilim had to face. The air around the Sycorax's body snapped and warped, sending grey-lined ribbons of mist into unsettling patterns. "It is too much. Your desperation blinds you. The dread art must never be used in Malifaux." He began to turn away. Fury rose in Nekima's blood. She took a step forward, her hoof brushing the Aerie's invisible barrier. The Sycorax paused and cocked his head in her direction. "I need to wake him," Nekima said. The Atagathe shamans muttered amongst themselves. Some fumbled with knucklebones or small stones, daubing their runes with blood to protect themselves. Only Nekima and the Sycorax remained unmoved. "A bold gambit. You are prepared to pay the ritual's cost?" the Sycorax asked. Nekima smiled coldly. "I didn't come alone." Beneath his mask, the Sycorax grinned mirthlessly. "Then we must also be willing to sacrifice. Atharak will see it done." One of the Atagathe walked from the mist as the Sycorax spoke. He was younger than the others, though his joints still were swollen and arthritic. A fiendish mask in the shape of a bat covered his face. Below that, a band of metal with curled edges around a withered throat. The shaman used a long staff topped with a curiously curved blade to help him walk. Frail as he appeared, Nekima could feel magic deeply embedded in the old Nephilim's form. It was thick and potent, the ether's power harnessing through blood and viscera. The smell was intoxicating. When Atharak's hooves touched on the knotwood's ground, the Sycorax hefted his staff. "It is done. See your work unfold, Nekima, Queen of the Nephilim. Know that fate's weave is set aflame, that even crossed stars might burn. The black Ares fog grew thicker, swallowing the Sycorax's aged form. The coven of shamans disappeared one by one, until only the mountainside and its field of broken stones remained. Mathematics brought structure into the world. Numbers made sense. And with her equations, Maxine Agassiz could impose order. Her order. She finished another equation on the dusty chalkboard, pausing only long enough to check her sums before starting the next algorithm in her long quest. Gateways to the infinite hovered all around, invisible to all but her. One touch, one bit of pressure. Maxine knew that's all it took to pass the barrier of multicolored fire boring its way through reality. The scientist never wanted anything more in her life. Orville would understand if she took one more glimpse into eternity. The iron ram swarmed with porters and yardsmen, unloading the freight cars and ushering the new arrivals through the chaos that was Malifaux Station. Long olive-green boxes and crates stamped with the colors of both the Guild and King's Empire filled the rail yard, while men and women in drab-tan uniforms blinked up at Malifaux's otherworldly sky. But the center of the swarm was a pair of large machines, wrapped in tarps and bulging off the sides of their flatbed. Marlowe received salutes and greetings as he approached Enclave Station, which he acknowledged and returned in kind. From the outside, it looked like the Guild was humming along at full capacity, that everything was business as usual. But Marlowe knew the lie of it. The evidence lay in the invoices that crossed his desk every day, the requisition forms that went unfulfilled, and the troop deployments that spread their forces thinner and thinner. Every division was working overtime to combat the host of problems the Burning Man brought with him. It just wasn't enough. The Governor-General breathed a sigh of relief when he saw Charles Hoffman standing on the platforms. The head of the Amalgamation Office was trying to covertly shoo away a witchling stalker, shuffling at his feet. Collins cleared his throat, and Hoffman looked up. "Governor-General," he said, extending a hand. Marlowe shook it, and Collins followed. "Appreciate you making the time, Hoffman. You're the expert in this field. Tull fielded some pretty unusual material. I wanted you on hand to evaluate its potential." Marlowe straightened his jacket and got a proper look at the iron ram. Most of the business of unpacking seemed to be complete, but there was still a lot to do. "He certainly packed her to the gills, didn't he?" "It's a surprising amount," Hoffman remarked, watching a pair of workers carry what looked to be an ammunition crate off one of the cars. "I didn't expect so many guns." "They're a military unit, Hoffman. A dozen battles against the Burning Man Earthside. They were key in turning the tide on the Baltic." Marlowe grimaced as a crate tumbled off the ram and cracked open, spilling its contents across the tracks. Sawdust and the black steel of machine rifles covered the ground. "Let's hope his men are better fighters than stevedores." "If they're so good, why did the king contract them out?" Hoffman asked. "Last I heard, they've still got their share of trouble Earthside." "Vienna made the arrangements. I think the Crown is trying to smooth things over with the Guild." Marlowe thumped Hoffman on the shoulder. "Let's try to put a brave face on it, Charles. Tull and his company are our best chance of settling things down. Once the Burning Man is contained, we can go back to doing things our way. Until then," he shrugged broadly, "we do what has to be done." There was silence for a moment. Marlowe glanced over at Hoffman. The engineer's eyes were heavy, the circles beneath darker than most the Governor-General had seen throughout the Guild. Too many anxious nights without answers. "We can always have some of the work parsed out. Your office only needs to handle the machinery. It's no good for anyone if you're struggling." Hoffman was already shaking his head. "It's no trouble, sir. but I've looked at the file on this Mr. Tull, and it's worrying. The man seems to embody the phrase collateral damage. His last entry alone. I'm not an architect, but Malifaux said he couldn't handle that sort of damage in the long term, not to mention the effect it would have on the people. I've read the reports, Charles, and personally signed the requisition form, Malifaux said. The fact of the matter is, we're also running out of options. If we let Malifaux slip through our fingers, it's over. Better to rebuild a city we control than try to govern its ashes. Sir, I believe that's Tull now, Colin said quietly, pointing. Hoffman's suit whirred as he adjusted his footing. It was difficult to see through the increasingly dense crowd of workers, but the man descending from one of the passenger cars cut a distinctive silhouette. A hefty black man wearing the blue of the King's Empire stood in the doorway of the Iron Ram's passenger car. Shining medals decorated his chest, competing with a thick beard and a bundle of dreadlocks for attention. A curious device encased his right ear, running along the back of his head and down his back. He held a triumphant pose for another few seconds, breathing in the Malifaux air before a commotion started behind him. Move! Pigro auto di velocita, I don't have all day. An olive-skinned woman in overalls, with a scarf tied under her chin, pushed her way through the door. It always in the clouds, Logiero. The Iron Ram's crew jumped as the woman turned her attention to them. Andiamo, these won't unload themselves. Tull called out after her as she marched away. Come on, Lou, just taking in the sights. It's not every day you travel to a different world, eh? He chuckled when Lou extended one particular digit in response. Marlowe was grateful for Hoffman's stomping mechanical exoskeleton, which made pushing through the crowd much easier. Corporal Tull, the Governor-General called out, extending a hand. Welcome to Malifaux. Tull broke into a wide smile. He took the proffered hand and shook it firmly, patting Marlowe on the shoulder with the other. Oh, a greeting party from the guild, how kind. I'm dying for the bog. The crapper on the train filled up 2 hours ago. It smells like a bomb went off in a butcher's shop, if you know what I mean. When Marlowe didn't respond immediately, Tull turned his attention to the Governor-General's companions. You fellas do call it the bog over here, right? It's not something fancy, like the bowl extraction engine, is it? Tull spoke slowly and loudly, as if the two men were deaf or dumb. The crapper. Where's the crapper? I'm sure we can make arrangements, Hoffman spluttered. I believe the facilities in the station are operational. Grand. They got a bar in there too, I trust. Tull began to make his way around the trio, his attention fully on the station beyond. I'm sure you can wait, Mr. Tull, Colin said quickly, glancing at Marlowe's increasingly furious face, especially for the Governor-General. Tull froze in place. When he turned back, he was all smiles. Terribly sorry, Mr. Marlowe. Didn't know. Anyway, it's a pleasure to meet you. I had no idea you'd come all this way to meet me. An honor, a real honor. Tull wrapped his hand around Marlowe's and shook it again. It took Marlowe a second to disentangle himself. Think nothing of it, Marlowe said, shaking his fingers. My assistant here is Collins, and this is Charles Hoffman, the head of our amalgamation office. You'll be working... I'm sorry to interrupt your governorship. Just a bit of business I have to attend to. Tull suddenly leaned away from the group to shout at another man a few dozen yards down the platform. Oi, Braxton. Lou's got cars 1 through 5. You can handle the rest of them, yeah? A blond man, towering nearby, a head above the Iron Ram's crew, opened his mouth as if to retort, then clapped it shut when he saw Marlowe. He folded arms, corded a muscle. Aye, boss. No problem. Sorry about that, Governor. You know how underlings can be. Easy to get distracted. He grimaced and glanced toward the station, then smiled tightly at Hoffman. Head of what office did you say? The Amalgamation Office. We maintain the Guild's constructs and machinery, and work to prevent illegal human-mechanical experimentation. The Governor-General has asked that we offer you any technical assistance you might need. Nice of you to set me up with a fellow Englishman, Tull said happily, perking up at the other man's accent. He clapped the side of Hoffman's suit and gave a low whistle as he admired the entire construct. Looks like he knows what he's doing too. It's a fine bit of work you got there. Built that for fun? The colour drained from Hoffman's face. Polio, he said stiffly. Tull tapped the contraption on the side of his head in solidarity. Not the same, but I've taken some damage myself over the years. Modern marvels, yeah? I'm sure you two will have time to share war stories in the next few weeks, Malifaux said, trying to get the conversation back on track. I appreciate you coming all this way, Mr. Tull. Your record is impressive. Concerning, but impressive. They say you're the best at what you do. The corporal ran a thick hand over his head, tussling his wild hair. Been keeping Vienna safe from the Burning Man for years. Fought those fishy bastards in England for a while too. King didn't care for the old ladies tearing up the place, but the Rams gave us a nice little spot, so we do what we can for 'em. Old ladies? Hoffman asked, puzzled. Oh, mate, wait till you see. Lou should have gotten them ready by now. Tull looked round, craning his neck to get a glimpse down the platform. His eyes lit up. There they are. The Iron Ram's flatbeds were unloading quickly, evidently with some help from the cargo itself. A pair of squat cannons carried on thick mechanical legs made their way across Malifaux Station, escorted by Amalgamation Office engineers and metallurgists. Every step was ponderous, sending out faint shivers through the masonry as the machines took steps. The guns left a trail of cracked cobblestones in their wake. At their forefront was the woman from before, overalls and scarf already showing hints of soot and grease. She carried several metallic boxes. Ethel and Gertrude, my old ladies, Tull said proudly as the cannons approached. Guns originally served in the Black Powder Wars. Saved them from retirement, gave them some new legs, and they've been with me ever since Earth went to shite. And Lou, of course. She's an honorary old lady, Tull joked, nudging Hoffman. Lou, come meet the GG and our new co-workers. Louisa stepped to the side, letting the two walking cannons continue toward the Enclave. She looked Marlowe up and down. This is the Governor-General. That he is. Louisa Fusi, Governor-General Franco Marlowe. Marlowe, Louisa, Tull said. I thought he'd be taller. Louisa hefted the ammunition boxes in her grip before lifting her eyebrows. If you've done talking, we still got a lot to unload. My cycle's packed all the way in the back of some maladetta boxcar, and Braxton can't find half the jetpacks. I told him to double-check a dozen times, but you know the lazy bastard left them all in Vienna. Yeah, I'm almost finished. Have you seen Walter around? Tull asked, but Louisa shook her head and continued walking. The man turned back to Marlowe unfazed. I'm sure he'll turn up. Is there anything else I can do for you, gentlemen? Hoffman and his people will make sure everything is taken care of and properly fitted to be action ready. I need to meet with your company to get you all caught up on how things run here. Marlowe raised an eyebrow as he looked at Tull's uniform. They didn't give you a set of guild reds in Vienna. Beg your pardon, sir, but red's not really my colour. Tull clapped his wide hand against the worn epaulets on his shoulder. Born in the blue, and I reckon I'll die in it too. We'll add that to the docket of things to discuss. Miss Fusi, Mr. Braxton, and your squadron commanders know they're expected at the Enclave. And Walter, Tull said. Of course, anyone you feel needs to be briefed about the situation and your assignments. Marlowe turned to Collins. See that this Walter fellow is added to the itinerary. Soon as everything's squared away, they'll be at the Enclave. Tull pointed his thumb over his shoulder, away from Malifaux Station. It's the big one, right? Marlowe followed Tull's gesture to the guild's stone and steel heart, looming over them all. The big one, he confirmed. Hoffman and Collins can handle everything from here. I'd like to get you situated as soon as possible. Malifaux is a much different beast than the Burning Man, and I need you aware of what we're up against. Speaking of, where is that burning bastard? Tull looked up, shielding his eyes. Took off running when he heard we was coming, eh? Back Earthside. He's been there for weeks, but we aren't sure when he's coming back, Marlowe replied. Great. Well, if there's nothing else... Tull patted his gut meaningfully. Marlowe gave a meaningful side glance to the guard who had escorted them from the Enclave. The man grimaced, but nodded and gestured toward the station. This way, Corporal. Tull shook Marlowe's hand one more time, nodded to Hoffman and Collins, then disappeared into the crowd. Collins cleared his throat. Well, he's not what I expected. No, Hoffman said. I hope Vienna knows what they're doing, sending him to us. A bedraggled mess of black fur stood in the doorway of the Iron Ram's coach. Two yellow eyes stared widely, looking in slightly different directions, while taking in the new sights. Hoffman raised an eyebrow as the cat stepped delicately onto the cobblestones. There was a pause. It sneezed, spray of whiskers twitching while the animal recovered from the aggressive nasal event. Collins watched the cat trot down the platform. Haven't seen a stray cat around here for a while. It's usually rats stowing away on trains. Not a stray, Collins. There's a collar. He belongs to somebody. Hoffman bent down, his exoskeleton whining as he went to one knee. Here, girl. Let's see who you belong to. The cat brushed against his metal leg, purring like a beehive. Hoffman took the little medallion under the cat's collar and read it. Two neurons inside the engineer's head collided as they made a connection, which led to a stomach-dropping interpretation of what that information meant. What's it say? Collins asked from over Hoffman's shoulder. The engineer gave a deep sigh and rubbed the bags under his eyes. They were going to get much heavier before the day was done. Walter. His name is Walter.
That's it for another episode of the Breachside broadcast. Join us next time for part 3 of Madness of Malifaux.